Yeah, I think one of the things that I discovered early in my work and being a photographer is that at first I tried to make images of the beauty of nature, just to appreciate what is there before we come, before we change it. And in Canada, I had a lot of space where I can enjoy that kind of landscape, the pure landscape. As Canada, there are just a little over 30 million people, and we have one of the largest countries in the world in terms of land mass. So there's a lot of space in which one can kind of look at what the planet looks like before we change it. So I think that perception was important. So when I started looking at large mines and large industry and how big metropolis cities are changing a landscape, I began to recognize that we were like an organism, a biological organism, growing and usurping more and more of that natural world. And what I started thinking as I was in my 20s and 30s is that my work wasn't going to be of my time if I just focused on nature itself, that we understand that story, we understand the beauty of nature through other films and photography and nature shows and being out there. But the story that wasn't being told was the story about how we change it, where we get those materials that build our cars and our jets and our buildings in our cities. So how do we live? How do we exist in these environments? And what is the impact of this kind of living on the natural world? So then I began to reshape my work to begin to look at these human events where we're actually entering into a landscape through judicial systems and economic systems and through technology, and moving material at a level that was unprecedented in history. So to me, that was a more accurate story of the time that I'm living in, is that we are gaining greater and greater impacts and nature's being diminished, and there is a balance, and we are quickly pushing the world out of balance as a species and a force that nature can't fully absorb. So we run in danger of tipping the planet into another state, leading possibly to our own extinction, or at least a very diminished and impoverished life if we don't get this right. Well, I do carry it with me to do the work I do, a deep curiosity about the world and how it works and how we integrate into that world and how we interact with the natural world. So that's a deep curiosity. And and to kind of take that notion of surprise, I see it very much as a sense of wonder, that the chance of making an image that you stand in front of and you think, where could this be? How could this be? Who created this space? And what's the space for? And to me, that when you start asking those questions, and when you're standing in front of an image, those questions can start to lead you down a path of inquiry to say, well, what is that place? And then start asking questions about, well, why are we doing that in that place? And it's a very complex relationship because, as I said, we need nature. All living things need nature. They need water from nature. They need the trees for the wood or food and nuts and heat, shelter. All these things are key things for any living thing. But ours is so vast and so complex and so powerful through the Industrial Revolution that the impact that we're having, it's not necessarily that we mean to do it or we mean to be bad. We just are. We are a plentiful species now, and we need a lot of stuff to keep going. But putting us in face to face with these industrial landscapes that we become disconnected from is one way that I have found a deeper meaning in the making of my work. So that's why I will have an idea like, well, where do our computers go? What happens to them after I'm finished with my computer? by asking that question and spending years of research and saying, in this city, about 30% of all, in China, 30% of all our computers are recycled. Then I spend years trying to get to that place to make that picture that I thought about 4 years ago. So for me, it's out of this thinking about where do things go and where do these things come from that I begin to do my research in my work to then find those places that become these stand-ins for a large activity, and they define that relationship that we have, to our natural world. And I do believe that, if you don't kind of have a curiosity, if you don't search for meaning and a sense of wonder about this kind of diversity, what I do see is that there is an incredible diversity around the world of different types of animals and trees and tropics and desert life and human diversity as well. So many types of cultures with different belief systems. So we live in a very diverse world, but what's happening is that diversity is starting to shrink, and we're shrinking that diversity. As the internet and as a value system that emanates from America or Western societies of consumerism and this form of capitalism kind of extends itself around the world. While it's doing that, languages are disappearing, cultures are disappearing, and ways of life are disappearing as well. So there is, as we wire the world together and become kind of one space in which something happens in Afghanistan or Pakistan or China, and the next 5 minutes, on Twitter, everybody knows about it, and in the next hour, it's all over the radio news, and then it hits the television. So we immediately are connecting into this thing that Marshall McLuhan called, the global village. It is now upon us. So now, with our computers and our smartphones, we're connected all the time, and that is something that's very different, and it's something that narrows the kind of broadness of complexity, that we live in a far more complex world than these news events and these things that media wants us all to look at and see as the most important thing happening in the world today. So that wonder needs to be nourished. It needs to be cultivated. Well, I did find this Pope and the encyclical to be a refreshing piece of work coming out of Rome, and very excited about it. And I think that with the fact that his constituency is almost 1 billion people, it's a very powerful message that he's delivering to his constituency that can have a very positive effect. I think that at this juncture in time, I think this may stand as an example, so that Muslim leaders start to, take note and start to talk to their constituencies as well in this regard, to really begin amongst those who are religious, really begin the conversation as well, so that it doesn't bypass that group. I think it's just, for me, it's really important to mobilize on all levels that possible. And what I find refreshing here as well is that in the encyclical, it's very forthright. It lays out the problems in a very concise, very kind of balanced way, and looking at ourselves as each a human being with their needs, and then looking at how our collective impacts and how the systems that we built around us are starting to fail us, and that we need to understand these failings. And I think, to me, that's really bringing the Catholic Church into a contemporary dialogue that I think is very critical to our time. So I'm all for it.